So by my watch, we have about 10 minutes for questions, and by now you know the drill. There's mics in the corridors here.
Hi, I'm Peter Lemieux. I was a PhD here many years ago. I have a question for Christopher Warshar, actually, because your findings seem to suggest a lot of responsiveness between governments and public opinion. And I was wondering if you could talk about how that fits compared to, say, the Page and Guyland's findings, where we don't see much relationship at all, at least at the national level. Is this something that, if you look below the national level, you see much more responsiveness, even though we don't see very much responsiveness in national governments?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think my take is that the consensus right now, both at the national and state level, is that the public policies tend to be relatively responsive to public opinion. And I think one of the puzzles has been that it seems like public policy is responsive to opinion at the national level, but we didn't know whether it was responsive at the state and local level. But I think one of the challenges is that public opinion and public policy are not on the same scale. So it's hard to say what is the right level of response to this. You know, we know that policy is responsive to opinion, but is it over-responsive, under-responsive? It's hard to say, and so especially when we want to sort of make a normative assessment of whether it's like the right level of responsiveness.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, I mean, their findings suggest that national policies tend to reflect powerful elites much more than they reflect the opinions of citizens. And yet your findings here suggest that, no, actually there's some responsiveness to citizen opinion, which is, I thought, rather, and it made me wonder if that's because you're looking at municipal and state level governments and not looking at, sort of national level questions.
It could be, although I think more recent research has showed that national policies are also relatively responsive to public opinion. So I think that at all three levels, it's sort of reassuring that changes in public opinion do seem to affect public policy. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes. Hi, Kathy Buckley, alum. I was late because I had a conflict this morning, so you may have talked a lot about it before I got here at 10:30. But I haven't heard the word climate change, and in terms of relevance, I can't think of anything more relevant for my son's survival. So I'm just wondering, what is it about this issue that it's not, a focus here today?
Can I respond to this? I shall blame the management completely on this, because with another 2 minutes, we would have reframed the implications of worrying about cybersecurity, recognizing that to be fully secure, we have to consider environmental security and matters of climate change that we've spent a lot of time on and still do at MIT, as well as a traditional form of military security for which we are well known at the Center for International Studies, and then the constructed domain of cybersecurity. It's in this context that it would have at least emerged, climate change would have emerged here. But what's important is that it is now an endogenous part of our political science discourse. It's not an aberration that we have to deal with as a side issue. It's really fundamental to security.
I'll add a word in that too. I teach about climate change, and I teach about it as a foreign policy problem, and immense difficulty, if you will, forming an international consensus that can back an international policy to address it, because I don't think we're going to solve it if we don't get several states involved. One of our grad students, Amanda Rothschild, did actually write a fascinating paper on how the international slave trade was ended, and she argues that there's important lessons to draw from that episode, the 19th century episode, for how we can, if you will, create a global tipping event that will tip global governance policy toward addressing climate change. And I think it's coming out as an article sometime soon. It's a terrific, very interesting use of history to look for solutions. But I'll say, I think another a study I hope folks will think about undertaking is, what can our field tell us about how have social movements in the past moved the needle on broad public opinion on difficult questions like climate change. I think we have a role to play in aggregating what we've learned from the delegitimation of slavery, the civil rights struggle of the early 60s, the success of the gay rights movement in the last 20 years. These are all movements which achieve very striking movement of the needle of public opinion on a difficult question. For my money, there's very important lessons here for how to move the needle on broad global opinion on climate change. Our compatriots in the environmental community and who work on climate change, they badly need our help on this. They don't have the expertise to kind of answer the question, how do we move the needle on broad public opinion? And I believe in the end, talking about what Chris is talking about, public policy will be in the end responsive to public opinion. And if we don't move the needle on broad public understanding of this question, we're not going to solve the problem. And our field has a lot to bring to that question. And any grad students who want to write a paper on that, come to me and we can talk about it.
Ken, did you want to add
Yeah, very quickly. Okay, there are a bunch of different angles on this that all of us have been teaching and doing research on. One of them is actually why it is that U.S. policies that do not address climate change adequately actually skip over some of the broad carbon tax measures or other things that our economist friends tell us are first best, and instead move to patchwork measures that might be bits and pieces of standards. A lot of that is a story to be told in terms of how those regulations may serve the particularistic interests of firms and overcome problems of collective action. But there are other issues as well. At this point, frankly, I am terrified that we may be too late and we may be hitting a step change. And then you turn to issues of radical technologies, the geoengineering stuff. And how do you appraise the risks and benefits when, in fact, you don't want to just do the experiment? And that takes us back into some of the other themes, but we don't have time right now. But your question is well taken.
one last question?
Barbara Samuels. It is truly exciting to be back here after 30 years. And having taken the real gift of MIT and working on Wall Street, rating agencies, the UN, the World Bank, and others. So I ask you, with all the work that you're doing, we have a critical opportunity and an imperative through the UN Sustainable Development Goals that have actual metrics, and we have social impact investors. How is it that you take the unique collaborative power of political science, technology, and science and really bring it to bear on at least three fronts? One is in the global implementation of these new principles that actually will be measured. Two, you have the nation states that are being measured by this, including through the OECD and the DAC with the new initiative to measure blended finance and how we're going to actually have specific projects that deliver on sustainable energy, water and sanitation, et cetera. And thirdly, there is a new focus on subnational results, knowing that now, if we're going to be sustainable, we have to be much more effective at the local government level. So where do you see the levers of actually interfacing so we can have impact? Thank you.
I would like to simply say that many of us have been involved at various stages since Rio in behind the scenes in discussion with various players, including the UN Division on Sustainable Development that was established. And there is no single answer to your question. We're all exploring. The Millennium Development Goals metrics and measurement, it's probably the first time that the international community has something like that is sustained over time. And I agree with you that we should be more involved, but I also believe that greater involvement on our part must be based on robust research that sustains this involvement. So I guess I would say we're not moving as fast as we could be.
Okay, well, thank you to the panelists, my fellow faculty members, and Thank you to all of you, and we will reconvene at 3:30. There's, I think, coffee outside up in the lobby out there.